We're told that seed mixture X is 40% ryegrass. And we're told that seed mixture Y is 25% ryegrass. And, well, I guess we've taken some of the mixture out of vat X and put it in, let's call this a barrel, taken it out of this vat and put it in this barrel. And let's say we've taken X pounds out of vat X and put it in here. And let's say we've taken Y pounds out of vat Y and put it in this mixture barrel. And we end up with a mixture that is 30% ryegrass. And that makes sense, right? That if this one has a slightly higher percentage of ryegrass and this one a slightly lower percentage of ryegrass, it makes sense that a mixture of the two would have a percentage of ryegrass somewhere in the middle. And we're asked what percentage of the weight of this mixture came from vat X. Percentage of this stuff is this stuff. And there are many, many ways to attack these mixture questions. One reliable method is to set up an equation that just focuses on the substance in the mixture. In this case, the ryegrass in this barrel. We can set up an equation that represents the ryegrass in the mixture. So, well, to continue this equation template, let's say, the rye that is in here, well, that came from two places, right? It came from some of this stuff was rye, some of these X pounds were ryegrass, and some of this stuff was Y. So we get the rye in the mixture from the rye that came from X, the rye from vat X, and the rye from vat Y. And that gives us all the rye in the mixture. So to get some numbers in there, the rye from X, well, we took X pounds of mixture in here. We took X pounds of stuff, and we know that 40% of that stuff is rye. So the rye from X, we can say, is 0.4 little x. And the rye from Y will be 0.25 of those Y pounds that we put in. And that's going to equal the rye in the mixture. And we know that this guy ends up, the rye in there is 30% of the stuff in there. So what's the stuff in here? Well, it's these X pounds plus these Y pounds, right? So 0.3 of X plus Y. And now we have an equation that we can do some work with. Although you'll notice right away that we've just got one equation and there are two variables, so we're never going to know an exact value for X or for Y. But we can still do something. And well, let me rewrite the equation over here in a new color, and we'll do some algebra. So 0.4x plus 0.25y equals, and I'll distribute my 0.3 across these parentheses, so equals 0.3x plus 0.3y. And well, anytime I do algebra, I like to give myself a goal. We've already said we're not going to know a value for x, and we're not going to know a value for y. So what can we find? Well, what's the question asking? The question's asking us what percentage of this came from x. So we don't really need values, right? We just need a ratio or a proportion. And well, let's set this as a goal. Let's solve this thing for the ratio of x to y. Now, that might not be our ultimate answer, but once we have one proportion, we can almost always get the proportion that we need. So there's our goal, x over y. All right, back to algebra. And to make life easier, let's Let's just get rid of these decimals. So let's multiply this whole equation by 100, and that'll give us 40x plus 25y equals 30x plus 30y, and that's a little bit better, 30y. And let's see, I'll bring my x's over here and my y's over here, so that gives me 10x equals 30y minus 25y is 5y. And I guess we're almost at our goal. Let's see, how can we get from here to here? I guess if I divide both sides by 10, I'll end up with a 10 in the denominator over here. And if I divide both sides by y, I'll end up with a y in the denominator over here, which is what we want. So that gives us x over y equals 5 over 10, which equals 1 over 2. But we always want to be careful with ratios, right? We have to be very careful to remember what they represent. We know that x over y is 1 over 2, but what does that mean? Well, x is the pounds in here that came from here, and y is the pounds in here that came from here. So we know that if x over y is 1 over 2, that means that for every 1 pound of x that's in here, there are 2 pounds of y. And is that what we're looking for, x over y? No, right? The question's asking us what percentage of the total is x. So we don't really want x over y. We want x as a proportion of the total, as a percentage of the total. So as a ratio, x over total, well, let's think about it. For every 1 pound of x, there are 2 pounds of y. So for every 1 pound of x, there are how many total? Well, there's the 2 y's and the 1 x. So the x to total is 1, 2, 3. And that's what we want, right? X over total is 1 over 3. And as a percentage, that means the percentage of this whole thing that came from x is 33 1/3%. And that's what we're looking for.